welcome to Raccoon Tale. I hope you enjoy your time here and find peace in the stories we tell. If you liked the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel. I suddenly realized that I had been reborn. Before I could even compose myself, a maid stumbled in, her face smeared with tears. "Madam, the young master has brought a woman, and is kneeling outside. He is making a scene, demanding to take her as a high-ranking concubine. He said that if you do not agree, he and the child in that woman's womb will kneel until they die in front of the gate." The image of Maisie, with a bright red handprint on her cheek, flashed before my eyes. It was the slap Leonard had just given her, a memory that served as a sharp reminder of the past. I had not only come back to life but returned to the exact day Leonard demanded a concubine and Richard was sneaking money out of the city to find his mistress. In my previous life, I was severely ill on this day and too weak to even sit up. My husband, Richard, had simply dropped a cold remark. "Being an official is not easy. I need money to bribe people above and below. Do not ask too many questions. I will handle it myself." After saying that, he turned his back and swept away more than half of the silver in my private treasury. This was the money I had saved over half a lifetime, including small change for winter, daily expenses and year-end bonuses. He took it all, not leaving a single coin. I almost coughed up blood from rage and immediately ordered people to chase after him. To my surprise, the front courtyard butler used my daughter-in-law, Victoria, as an excuse to refuse my request for a carriage. "The young mistress has ordered that without rules, there can be no order. If the madam wishes to use staff or a carriage, she must follow the procedure. First, report to the gatehouse, then wait for her turn, and finally dress properly before going out to maintain the family's dignity." My daughter-in-law came from a prestigious family and was raised with the education of the capital's elite. Every word she spoke was about dignity and reputation. Meanwhile, I grew up in the countryside. In my early years, I made a living as a butcher, slaughtering pigs and cleaning entrails. I only cared about convenience and comfort. Our habits were different, and our views never aligned. Within 6 months of her marriage, we had argued many times, neither of us willing to yield. Fire and water cannot coexist, and we were eyesores to each other. In my previous life, I thought she was intentionally making things difficult for me on this specific day. Therefore, I ignored my unfilial son's threats and did the exact opposite of what she wanted. I threw the gates wide open to welcome the pregnant mistress into the house. It was my way of retaliating to humiliate and suppress Victoria. As expected, that woman was not a kind soul. She encroached step by step, masterfully twisting the truth and always playing the victim. Within less than 3 years, she pushed Victoria to the point where she had no place left to turn. I had personally invited the wolf into our home, and then played deaf and mute as she wreaked havoc. This caused the resentment in Victoria's heart to grow deeper until there was no turning back. In the following years, Richard gradually drained my retirement savings just to support his mistress outside the city. Victoria knew this well but remained indifferent. My son, Leonard, betrayed his marriage and indulged in the world of wine and women, leaving Victoria to suffer in silence. I watched coldly. She only wished for me to die 1,000 deaths. I, in turn, gloated at the sight of her arrogant and icy demeanor, being crushed to the point where she could hardly walk. It was not until Richard's secret affair was exposed that I was left in shock. The son I had raised with such care was not my own blood. My biological daughter had been swapped by them and given to the mistress, only to be tortured to death long ago. Hatred surged within me, and the urge to kill took hold. But by the time I woke up to the truth, I was no match for the decades of plotting by that father and son. I was one step too late. The servants had been bribed by them. They secretly poisoned me, leaving me in a daze, and then locked me in the woodshed. A fire that had been planned for a long time was set to kill me under the guise of an accident. The husband I had devotedly supported only returned my kindness with deception and exploitation. The son I had painstakingly raised was the child of an enemy, and he plotted my death. I felt that my life was an utter failure, betrayed by everyone. Just as I was waiting to die in tears, Victoria, the daughter-in-law I had fought with for half a lifetime, broke the lock and rushed into the sea of fire to untie me. By then, she had been tormented by the mistress for years. Her unborn child had died in her womb, and she was frail and riddled with illness. Yet, I did not know where she found the strength. When a wooden beam collapsed, she lunged forward to shield me, using her own body as a human shield to save my old bones. She coughed up blood and lay in my arms, every word soaked in tears. Only today do I realize I was wrong. Because of those who stole our nest, they drove us apart and made us fight to the death. In the end, it was that father and son who sat back and reaped the benefits. Your wealth and my dowry have all ended up in their pockets. If there is a next life, I will not fight with you anymore. We must make them pay their debt of blood with blood. They must die without a whole body. She died in my arms, unable to close her eyes in peace. I was so consumed by hatred that I cried tears of blood. I pulled out the butcher knife I used years ago for slaughtering meat and charged into the backyard. Just as they were raising their glasses to celebrate their perfect reunion, I swung the blade down. One life for every strike, I killed them all. Finally, I collapsed in the middle of the blinding snow. I did not expect to be reborn. Recalling the tragic deaths of Victoria and myself in our previous life, the hatred in my heart was uncontrollable. I drove a knife straight through the butler's throat. The traitorous wretch deserved no less. I wiped the warm blood from my hand and pulled out a horsewhip hidden under the bed. Looking at the butler's corpse, my eyes turned cold. If they wanted death, I would not mind killing them all over again. However, as I stepped into the courtyard with the whip, I bumped into Victoria, who was running toward me in a hurry. Before I could speak, she said, "Mother, if you wish to leave the manor, please use my carriage." Night Shadow is a horse from the Prime Minister's estate. It runs like the wind and can travel 1,000 miles in a day. Afraid I didn't understand, she gripped me tightly and whispered so only we could hear, "The butler is my father's man. Actually, I never intended to make things difficult for you. Outside the city, at the foot of Plum Blossom Mountain in Jade Spring Manor, if you go there, everything will become clear. Remember, take many people with you." Her grip was firm, her eyes determined, and her instructions were filled with genuine concern. I immediately realized that she had also been reborn. Thinking of the blood-stained hatred she held at her death, an idea sparked in my mind. I asked, "The butler has died a gruesome death. I am old now, and leaving the manor so conspicuously would be too much. You also cannot afford the reputation of being a jealous wife by handling that treacherous couple yourself. How about we switch the people we kill?" Victoria's pupils trembled, and her voice shook. "Mother, have you also come back to life?" I nodded, my nose stung with tears as I whispered, "I have returned. We must make them pay their debt of blood with blood." Victoria was brilliant. In an instant, she understood my intent. She said, "Let me take that trip to the foot of Plum Blossom Mountain for you." Her gaze toward the manor gate was bone-chillingly cold. That father and son are of one mind. We, mother and daughter-in-law, should also join forces. She curled her lips into a smile that was both gentle and freezing. "Victoria still wants to compete with mother one more time. We shall make it so they can neither live nor die. Let us see whose methods are more superior." Without hesitation, she bowed and led the servants away without looking back. I gripped the long steel wire whip in my hand and went straight to find the traitor. Leonard thought I loved him to the bone and believed I was there to welcome him into the manor. His eyes lit up instantly, and he shouted, "Mother, you haven't recovered from your cold yet. Even if you love your eldest grandson, you shouldn't have come personally to welcome Willowloo into the manor. It is all because of Victoria, that jealous woman. She used the threat of divorce to force me to separate from the child in Willow's womb." Before he could finish his sentence, my whip came down, striking him viciously across the mouth. The long, sharp whip hissed as it tore through flesh. Leonard's mouth was instantly shredded, and blood gushed out. In the previous life, he twisted the truth to ruin Victoria's reputation. In this life, I would ensure his foul mouth could never utter another word. The confident look on Leonard's face froze. He couldn't believe it. He cried and yelled at me, "Mother, you have never laid a finger on me. How dare you hit me? Are you not afraid?" Snap. Before he could finish, my whip struck again. This strike carried the pain of the past life and the hatred of this one. It hit him square in the waist. Blood began to seep through his fine silk robes. The crowd of people they had intentionally drawn to watch the scandal gasped in shock. A murmur arose. They said, "I am a butcher, just as the rumors say. Crude, violent, and only capable of using force." I didn't care about my reputation. But Victoria came from a prestigious family and valued dignity and shame. In the previous life, she repeatedly reminded me to keep my dignity and follow the rules just so people wouldn't have anything to use against me. She had no idea that those insults were deliberately spread by my wretched husband and that ungrateful wolf of a son. Meanwhile, under the sweet whispers of my husband, I believed Victoria despised my rural origins and was intentionally humiliating me. The misunderstandings grew deeper and deeper. In this life, I will take their lives, and I will protect Victoria's reputation. Looking at Leonard lying on the ground, wailing in pain, I felt not a shred of pity. Instead, I stepped forward and kicked him hard in the mouth. His teeth flew out, and blood splattered the ground. Amidst the cries of horror and accusations from the crowd that I was being too cruel, I shouted at the top of my lungs, "You have been married for less than half a year, yet you abandoned your wife to commit adultery with another woman. You even got her pregnant with a bastard, shaming our family and destroying our reputation. You deserve this beating." Leonard's body trembled, his eyes filled with disbelief. Beside him, Willow, trying to show deep affection and resolve, threw herself in front of Leonard and questioned me. "Even a fierce tiger does not eat its cubs. How can Madame be so cruel to Leonard? I know you," and the young mistress looked down on my humble origins. "It was my mistake to have such illusions. Madame, your humble origins are different from the arrogance of the elite. I am the one who deserves to die." What a silver-tongued woman. Snap. I struck another powerful blow with the whip onto Leonard's legs. He clutched his legs and rolled on the ground in agony. I turned to the trembling Willow and let out a cold laugh. "I might not care if you lack any sense of shame or virtue, but if my son is shameless and despicable, I will beat him to death myself." I dragged the blood-stained whip to Leonard's face. I asked coldly, "Years ago, you and your father hid the truth from me. You used the fact that I saved Lady Tang's life to force Victoria into marriage, only to turn around and treat her coldly. You even took her dowry to support this lowly creature. Tell me, do you deserve this beating?" I exposed all the filth they had hidden from me until death in the previous life, laying it bare before the eyes of the world. The crowd, which had been so righteous in criticizing me just moments ago, began to change. Some shook their heads and sighed. Others cursed the Chen father and son for being shameless and taking advantage of someone's kindness. Some called Leonard ungrateful, while others praised me for being just and impartial, noting that I was nothing like the rumors of a violent, ignorant woman. Seeing that her threats were useless, Willow switched to acting pitiful. She crawled to my feet. She grabbed the hem of my skirt and cried until she could barely breathe. "All these mistakes are mine. I do not ask for a title or a promise. I only beg the madam to show mercy for the sake of the flesh and blood in my womb and spare Leonard. If you won't speak, then so be it." As soon as I finished, I raised the whip. Snap, snap, snap. I struck repeatedly. Leonard rolled on the ground, drenched in tears and blood, his dignity completely gone, and his body looking as if the skin were about to be peeled off. When I was finally out of breath, I stopped and declared loudly, "I welcome the daughter of the Tang family into this house with a grand ceremony. She is my only daughter, in law for life. Only the child in her womb is my true eldest grandson. As for any weeds growing outside, even if there are thousands of them, don't even think about stepping through the gates of my Lee Manor." Willow's face froze, and she forgot to cry. As for me, I stepped over Leonard as if he were a dead dog, using my foot to nudge him with pure disgust. "Since you were young, I taught you that everything you have today was exchanged for the blood and lives of your grandfather's people. Every day, I reminded you to cherish your current wealth. Don't forget that when your father was almost starving to death on the streets, it was I who gave him a bowl of clean pig entrails and saved his life. Yet look at you. You eat and dress from the wealth of your maternal family, but you are not only ungrateful, you are wicked. You committed adultery, oppressed your wife, and were disloyal to your parents and your people. You are not worthy of being a descendant of my Lee family." Each sentence was like a knife, and each word was like a whip. I scolded that father and son until they couldn't lift their heads. Finally, I threw out a cold, regretful sentence. "According to the law of our dynasty, those who commit adultery are to be drowned in a pig cage." Leonard trembled violently. In his dying state, he suddenly sat up and screamed, "Mother, you only know how to use us to gain a good reputation. For the sake of your outward fame, you would even kill your own biological son. Have you ever thought about how father will handle this when he returns? The Chen family has few descendants. You know better than anyone how much father values his bloodline. If Victoria never bears a child, do you intend to let the Chen family line end? You have always respected and followed father. Do you truly dare to go against him? In the past, I was deceived by Richard's hypocrisy. I was blinded by his act of not taking any concubines or maids, and his constant gentleness and care. It made me love, trust, respect, and obey him. But I am no longer the person I was. Using him to pressure me will only make me strike harder. Mother. A voice called out just as I was about to swing the whip down in rage. It was Victoria, who had arrived just in time to stop me. She stepped forward slowly, clearly prepared to leave the city. After exchanging a look with me, Victoria bowed gracefully. We have been married for half a year, yet my husband has never spent a single day in the main courtyard. He has never shared a bed with me. So where would this child come from? You used that excuse to smear and pressure me only because you were dissatisfied in your heart. We should part as friends, not enemies. I do not wish to make things difficult for Mother. I ask to return to my family home and quietly await the divorce papers from my husband. The people around all gasped, looking at Victoria with even more pity. A young woman as beautiful as a flower had been tricked into a marriage where she lived like a widow. It was heartbreaking. Now she was even being falsely accused and her reputation ruined. It was truly tragic. With me having gone first to whip and scold them, Victoria was now in a position of power in the eyes of the public. Even if she cried and demanded her dowry back to return to her mother's house, she wouldn't be labeled as jealous or hated by her family like in the previous life. Although Victoria was born into a prestigious family, she was the daughter of a secondary wife. Oppressed by her father's primary wife, she faced obstacles at every turn. Even her marriage was forced upon her by the Chen father and son. Lady Tang, unwilling to marry off her biological daughter to our family, pushed Victoria to take her place instead. Now, by speaking of divorce, Victoria was essentially risking everything. I pretended to persuade her to stay, but in the end, I purposely failed to stop her. I watched as Victoria, with red-rimmed eyes, entered her carriage and left with quiet composure. I wondered what kind of fate she would bestow upon my wretched husband, Richard. I looked forward to it with great anticipation. Soon, the streets were buzzing with gossip. Among the crowd, those who knew the truth cursed the Chen family for being despicable and shameless. Others felt deep pity for Victoria, calling her a beautiful flower thrown into a pile of rotting mud. However, there were also patriarchal men who shook their heads and sighed. They claimed Victoria was simply intolerant and should have just turned a blind eye to the concubine. They argued that making a scene only brought shame to her husband and father-in-law, with a reputation for being a jealous wife, who would dare marry her after a divorce. These words seemed to give Leonard strength. He lifted his head and looked at me with eyes full of hatred. Mother, have you gone mad from your illness? You cannot even distinguish who your own family is anymore. Was Victoria born from your womb? Or am I, Leonard, your true flesh and blood? Even a fierce tiger does not eat its cubs. You are a grandmother, yet you are so stubborn in front of everyone, determined to drive your own son and the mother of your grandson to death. If you refuse to distinguish between family and outsiders, I will sever our mother-son relationship. As soon as his venomous words fell, Willow, cowering beside him, immediately understood his intent. She shed her pale look and began to wail pathetically. It is because I am useless. I gave my purity to your father, only to be looked down upon because of my humble origins. I have burdened you so much that even your ancestors will not acknowledge you. I have no face left to live in this world. Let me take our child and die with me. After saying that, she charged toward the stone lion statue in front of the manor. She clearly intended to hit her head to feign an injury, hoping to gain sympathy and force the manor to take responsibility. I was quick and agile. I swung my whip like a long snake, wrapping it tightly around Willow's slender neck. I squeezed until she could not breathe, then used all my strength to pull her back and hurl her toward Leonard. Leonard could not dodge in time and was struck squarely in the chest. Willow was unharmed, but Leonard, who was already covered in whip wounds, was hit right on his injuries. His face twisted in pain and turned deathly pale. Before Willow could open her mouth, I curled my lips into a cold, piercing smile. Look, I have called someone here for you. Willow turned her head, and her face became as white as paper. From the crowd, a travel-worn and exhausted man rushed forward. Willow, I am still alive. You said you were carrying my child. Is it true? The crowd was shocked. The man stepped forward and pulled Willow into his arms, crying that he had let her and the child suffer. At this point, Leonard, who was as stupid as a pig, still did not understand the situation. He failed to see Willow's pale face and her evasive gaze. He swung a fist and punched the man in the face. Have you been bribed by that wretch woman, Victoria? Did you come here to ruin Willow and my child? I tell you, I do not believe a single word. Willow cowered behind Leonard's back, not daring to look up. Her voice was weak and trembling. "If the madam will not let me into the manor, I will simply leave. Why must you smear and destroy me like this? I have never met this man." The man stumbled back a step, tears streaming down his face. He pulled out letters and a deed of sale from his chest, displaying them before everyone as he questioned her in despair. "I sold my only boat just to buy your freedom. Afraid you would suffer, I went to a foreign land to earn silver so you would have enough to eat and wear. Yet in the end, the child became someone else's, and you will not even acknowledge the man who knelt before heaven and earth with you. As expected of a filthy creature from a brothel, turning your back on people so easily. If you are heartless, do not blame me for being ruthless. I am going to the magistrate right now to sue you for adultery." He scattered the letters across the ground. The pages were filled with vows of eternal love, while the deed of sale was like a heavy stone that crushed Willow's mask of lies. The crowd erupted into a frenzy of gossip, everyone waiting to see how much face Leonard would lose. A stranger might not recognize the handwriting, but how could Leonard not know it? The humiliation was like a slap to his face, and his rage reached a boiling point. Leonard looked like a pathetic clown. The mocking laughter and whispers from the onlookers made it hard for him to even stand. Finally, he could not take it anymore. He raised his hand and delivered a sharp slap to Willow's face. "You bitch, you deceived me so cruelly." He then kicked her repeatedly in the abdomen until bright red blood flowed from beneath her. In our previous life, Willow had used this very child to frame Victoria, accusing her of being a jealous wife and stripping her of her household management rights. Because of the loss of face, the Tang family had also treated Victoria like trash. But in this life, when my maid Maisie followed the clues I provided and found Willow's true husband, everything came to an end. In the previous life, Willow knew her husband was still alive. Afraid he would threaten her wealth and status, she hired assassins to kill him and dump his body into the city moat. In this life, an evil person will be harvested by a demon like me. Those who died unjustly in the previous life deserve to live in this one. Willow writhed in pain, but before she could beg for mercy, the authorities I had arranged beforehand arrived. Like dragging a dead dog, they hauled Willow and Leonard away. Since Willow had hidden her identity and committed adultery with Leonard, she was sentenced to be drowned in a pig cage. In the previous life, she caused Victoria to lose her child and kept her imprisoned in the backyard, never able to be a mother. In this life, she paid with her own life. Although Leonard had been deceived, he had still committed adultery during his marriage, an unforgivable crime. After 30 strikes of the heavy board, he was carried back half dead. However, the great gates of the manor remained tightly shut. Leonard rolled on the ground, crying and cursing, causing a great disturbance. He knew his body and mind were severely wounded, and he had nearly lost his life. At this moment, he needed protection, comfort, and medical care the most. I opened the gates and looked down at him from above. I asked Leonard indifferently, "About severing our mother-son relationship, are you still planning on it?" The moment he looked up, his eyes were filled with panic. He had thought his previous threats were just words I wouldn't take seriously, but I displayed a cold and heartless demeanor, showing that I truly no longer wanted him as a son. With no way out, he slowly knelt. "I was blinded by an evil person and made a grave mistake. I beg Mother to be generous and forgive me." If this were the previous life, I would have thought he was just momentarily misguided and would wake up after this ordeal. But now, I only wished for his death. I would not let him off easily or offer any comfort. I said coldly, "Your father was originally a man who joined my Li family as a matrilocal husband. By law, you should carry the surname Lai. I only allowed you to use the surname Chen because I pitied your father for being alone. Today, you used the name of the Chen family to pressure me and even dared to speak of severing our relationship. If I continue to endure this, will this Le Manor not truly change its name? If you want a letter of severance, I, Jade Li, will give it to you." I took the letter of severance that Ted just brought and threw it directly into Leonard's face. The paper falling caused his body to sway, unable to stand steady. Years ago, my father went to war. His sworn brothers were all officials in the capital, and because he died saving the Prince of the South, I, a woman who slaughtered pigs, was protected by the royal family. I was able to keep the estate my father left behind and stand firm in the capital. Even as an official, Richard was only a minor 6th-rank clerk. If that father and son wanted to kill me, they would have to wait until the Prince of the South passed away. How could they dare to turn against me now? No matter how much Richard loved his mistress, He dared not lose the support of Jade. Leonard kowtowed repeatedly, the thudding sound echoing. I was foolish and said the wrong things in a moment of anger. Please remember Mother's kindness in raising me. It is right for Mother to be angry. I kowtow to admit my fault and beg you to calm your rage. He was truly terrified. His forehead was covered in blood, and his face looked incredibly wretched. I pretended to be heartbroken and let out a long sigh. Then you shall take a step and kneel once. Kneel all the way to the temple of the goddess in the south of the city. Kowtow 3 times to atone for your sins, and then kneel all the way back. The goddess brings blessings to the world and has deep virtue. If she forgives you, then I have no reason not to. Leonard looked up. My face was cold and without a trace of hesitation. He had no choice but to weakly agree. Despite his many injuries, he began his arduous journey. He took a step and kowtowed once, heading toward the south of the city. His blood dripped onto the stone floor. Every step he took recalled my tears from the previous life, and every step fully exposed his lack of virtue and loyalty to the entire world. The son I had once held in the palm of my hand, whom Richard had cherished as a treasure, had never suffered such humiliation and torture. It was truly a fate worse than death. For more than 2 hours, I had Tessa personally supervise him. That girl was honest and still held my whip. When Richard's trusted subordinates tried to intervene, Tessa immediately drove them back with a strike of the whip. Do you really want the young master to sever his relationship with the madam? If you dare to interfere further and ruin the relationship between mother and son, I will let the master kill you. No one dared to lend a hand. With such a long delay, his broken body was likely ruined for good. Leonard, in a fit of rage that made the world spin, knelt there and back. Finally, he whispered, Mother, I have finished. After saying that, he could no longer hold on, his eyes rolled back, and he fainted on the spot. The corners of my mouth curled slightly, but I shouted out loud, My son, I have forgiven you. Quickly, call for Dr. Chu to save my son. I played the role of a mother heartbroken to the bone. Only when I turned away did I hide my cold, mocking smile behind my sleeve. Victoria, I am returning to you a half-dead creature, rotten to the core. You can crush him however you like to get your revenge. I wonder if you will be satisfied. Dr. Chu and my father were as close as biological brothers. After my father died shielding the Prince of the South, they looked upon me as their own daughter. Knowing that the Chen father and son were secretly plotting against me, Dr. Chu was so angry his beard stood up. He promised without a second thought. Whatever Jade wants, I am willing to shed my blood for it. I looked at the cold moon at the edge of the sky and let out a mournful sigh. I want them to live a life worse than death. As soon as I finished, Maisie cried out in joy. This is wonderful. The master has been carried back. His entire body is burnt black. He no longer looks human. I rushed over to see. Looking at that charred body where his features were no longer distinguishable, I couldn't help but take a sharp breath of cold air. After Dr. Chu finished his examination, his face became even more alarmed. He suppressed the pleasure rising in his heart and said with a trembling voice, The burns on the skin are not the scariest part. His lower body is completely deformed and destroyed by the fire. I am afraid he can never be a man again. I was shocked but also secretly happy. I couldn't help but inwardly praise Victoria. Victoria truly makes people see her in a new light. But outwardly, I pretended to stumble and shouted sternly, How could the master have come to such a state? Richard's followers trembled and did not dare to look up. I pretended to close my eyes in pain for a moment, and then turned to shout at Maisie to report it to the officials. The master and Lord Song went out for a stroll and met with such a disaster. I am his wife, and I must demand justice. The followers panicked, not knowing what to do. Just as they were about to open their mouths to persuade me, I cut them off coldly. If you dare to interfere, perhaps this matter is related to you as well. Guards, tie up this traitor and take him straight to the magistrate. The butler, who had been loyal to Richard, collapsed to his knees with a thud, desperately pleading and trying to sever all ties to the matter. Maisie had already gone to report to the magistrate, ensuring that Richard's beloved mistress would die without a whole body. As for me, I would seek a different ending for my dear husband, a fate far worse than death. With severe burns covering his entire body, his treatment was bound to be agonizing. It was inevitable that his flesh would rot and fester with maggots, leaving him in a state where he could neither live nor die. Especially that private area of his lower body, I feared it would rot away until nothing was left. Dr. Chu immediately understood my meaning and nodded firmly. Most likely, it will be exactly as you say. Hearing this, my heart was finally at peace. That night, I slept more soundly than I ever had. After all, I had spent the entire night caring for Richard's wounds. He screamed in agony for hours, a sound that brought absolute tranquility to my soul. But if I was happy, how could I let Victoria remain mistreated? Early the next morning, I prepared grand gifts and led a majestic procession of servants to the minister's estate. Lady Tang was displeased that Victoria kept returning to her mother's house at the slightest provocation. But seeing me arrive in person with such generous gifts to invite her back, she immediately put on an air of importance. She used the excuse of inviting several noble ladies for tea and flower viewing to boast about my apology, which played right into my hands. I acted with deep regret and displayed complete sincerity. My son was foolish and caused Victoria much humiliation. Yesterday, I scolded him severely in public to make my stance clear. In this lifetime, I only acknowledge Victoria as my daughter-in-law. Years ago, when my husband forced this marriage upon your house, I was truly unaware. It was my fault that you and Victoria had to suffer. But since Victoria has entered the Lee Manor for my sake, I swear before heaven and earth to treat her as my own blood. My Lee family will only recognize Victoria's offspring as the rightful heirs, and I will place Victoria's status even above my useless son. If I break this vow, may I die without a whole body. My words were calm, but the oath was merciless. The noble ladies present were all mothers themselves, and they couldn't help but feel sympathy for the plight of a mother raising a spoiled child like me. They began to speak up on my behalf, persuading Lady Tang. Lady Tang, who only wanted to save face, took the opportunity to follow the current. She muttered a few words and allowed Victoria to return to the manor with me. Inside the carriage, I turned to Victoria and whispered, locking the doors, drugging the tea, and setting a fire to burn someone is not an easy task. A frail woman like you couldn't have done it alone. It was him who helped you, wasn't it? Victoria's hand, clutching her handkerchief, trembled slightly. She lowered her eyes and answered softly, it was him. For my sake, he would do anything. My only regret is that I can give him nothing in return. The man Victoria spoke of was her childhood sweetheart and cousin, Sebastian Shen. The two were deeply in love and should have grown old together. Unfortunately, Lady Tang looked down on the Shen family's poverty, and the Chen father and son had forced the marriage, tearing the lovers apart. In the previous life, when Victoria lost her child, Sebastian was consumed by rage. He charged into the manor with a blade to seek justice for her, but he fell into a trap and died under a hail of arrows from the authorities. My life was already half over, but Victoria's life was just beginning. The blessings she deserved and the union she should have enjoyed, I would help her reclaim them all. I clasped her hand, my voice tender to the core. Who says you can give him nothing? What if I truly want the two of you to be together for the rest of your lives? Victoria looked at me in shock, her eyes wide with disbelief. Is that possible? If killing our enemies was as easy as turning over a hand, then this is even simpler. Just wait and see. As soon as we reached the manor gates, we encountered the authorities. Since the matter involved Richard, I immediately invited them to his bedside, ignoring the fact that he had just taken medicine and fallen asleep. I sent Tessa to wake the master. Tessa was an honest girl. While calling him gently, she used the moment when no one was looking to fiercely press a palm down onto Richard's bandaged lower body. Richard screamed like a possessed demon, his body jerking upward, only to hit his other wounds. He wailed in a heart-wrenching agony. I pretended to help him up, but every time I reached out, I intentionally squeezed his most painful spots, causing cold sweat to pour down his forehead until his breath became shallow. Only then did I stop for the sake of the next act. The officers spoke bluntly. Lord Richard, there is no record of you meeting with Lord Song. At the crime scene, we found no trace of Lord Song's presence. However, we did find a woman with disheveled clothing who was unharmed, hiding in the cellar. We have taken her to the dungeon. Under severe interrogation, she confessed to being your mistress. She claimed that while you were both being intimate, she accidentally knocked over a lamp, causing the fire. Lord Richard, do you have anything to say? Richard's face, already pale, turned as white as a sheet. Before he could speak, I shouted loudly, how ridiculous. Everyone knows my husband may be a matrilocal spouse, but I cherished him for his refined looks and his great talent. I have always loved and respected him. I even let my son take his surname to honor his father. For years, he has been gentle and caring, meticulously choosing jade hairpins, powder, and sweets just to please me. Our bond is deep, and we have shared trials and tribulations for years. Could such a man truly turn into an ungrateful wretch who threw away his reputation and future for a woman? If a man who married into my house truly dared to commit such a shameful act, I would immediately go to the palace and demand he be drowned in a pig cage. Does he not care for his own honor, or the dignity and future of his son anymore? The words Richard intended to say to protect his sweetheart, Cynthia Meng, were stuck in his throat. At this moment, he did not yet know that the son he saw as his lifelong hope had already been shamed at the magistrate and had no future left to protect. Therefore, even for his son's sake, he had to grit his teeth and keep his affair with Cynthia a secret from me. Moreover, in a life or death situation, a man as selfish as he was would never push himself into a dangerous abyss. His hands, bandaged like pig trotters, secretly clenched into fists. He whispered weakly, "She is lying. Just one sentence is not enough." I followed up immediately. "Then why did you go to that courtyard in broad daylight, a man and a woman alone, and you even took my private silver, claiming it was for bribes? Was that money actually to support that woman? I must go to the dungeon myself and see what kind of demon she is to be able to seduce my husband and steal my money." Richard panicked and hurriedly denied it. "It's not like that. She and I are from the same hometown. She was alone and begged for help, so I showed a bit of mercy." The officer immediately countered, "But in her confession, her parents and brother are all doing business in Yunzhou, and they are quite wealthy. Why would she need Lord Richard's help?" Richard's lies were exposed, and he began to scramble, feigning anger. "What a silver-tongued woman, even I was deceived. If I had known she had family to rely on, why would I have used Madame's silver to help her return home?" I immediately interrupted. "She must have gotten the money and, fearing discovery, decided to kill my husband and flee with the silver." Richard trembled. He understood perfectly that if he admitted this, the charge of murder for wealth would fall squarely on Cynthia, and the consequences would be dire. He hesitated, so I delivered the final blow. "My husband has always been a man of integrity and would never want to see a fellow townsman die. But my husband took a servant with him, who is currently locked in my woodshed. We can bring him out for interrogation." Richard's face lost all color. "There are 82 types of torture in the dungeon. Even a stone mouth can be made to speak the truth. Once they investigate, everything from his affair with Cynthia to Leonard's swapped identity will be exposed." Finally, he gritted his teeth and spoke each word with cold cruelty. "She wanted to be my mistress, but I refused. Out of hatred, she intentionally set the fire to burn me to death. If she hadn't drugged my tea, how could I have been burned like this? Attempted murder is an unforgivable crime. There is no need for further questioning. The case can be closed." As soon as he finished, he realized with horror that his son, sitting in a wheelchair, had been pushed to the door by Victoria. Leonard had heard every single word. In that instant, Richard's venomous testimony against Leonard's biological mother became the fatal blow that severed the bond between father and son. The rare concern the son had felt for his father in his moment of crisis immediately turned into the final nail in the coffin of their relationship. Leonard screamed like a madman, "Get him out of here. Seeing him makes me sick." Richard trembled all over, but he could not move. He could only watch as his son began to feel a hatred that pierced his heart. There was no way to explain or defend himself. But Leonard was not faring any better. His father, to save himself, had personally framed Leonard's own mother and sent her to her death. Leonard was consumed by rage and smashed the tea table in the room, but the boiling water from the freshly brewed pot splashed onto his hands, scalding a large area. Ironically, the servants in the courtyard had all been chased away by his previous cursing. His knees, which had been forced to kowtow, were treated with strong medicine by the doctor, and were now so painful he couldn't even stand. He struggled to get to the door to call for help, but he fell face first into the mess on the ground. It was in this pathetic state, with blistered hands on the filthy floor, that Victoria and a group of servants found him when they pushed the door open. That father and son. One broken on the bed, agonizing in heart and soul, the other broken in the courtyard, screaming in helplessness. With Dr. Chu and Victoria watching over them, I was free to take a trip to the dungeon and reclaim my private silver. The manipulative woman from my previous life was now hanging on the wall, her body covered in wounds and no longer looking human. I heard she would soon be exiled. When she saw me, the hatred in her eyes was unconcealed. "You forced him to frame me, didn't you? He had no choice but to bow to your authority. I understand everything." When dealing with women, she was merciless. But when it came to men, she deceived herself with a fake, soft heart. I would never forget how, in the previous life, she stood outside the locked woodshed and looked at me with a triumphant, mocking gaze. She had won, and in her victory, she gave me a fatal blow. It's better to die early. You can reunite with your daughter in the underworld. Do not blame me for being cruel. Blame yourself for not being as careful as others. After decades of waiting for the right moment, the wealth of this manor and a lifetime of happiness are the blessings I deserve. Looking at her now, half dead and miserable, I asked coldly, "How did my daughter die?" Her body shook violently, and her face was filled with disbelief. I continued, "He told me that you killed my daughter, so he gave your life to me as compensation. Then we will wipe away our grudges and live the rest of our lives together. Oh, by the way, you've probably heard, haven't you? I beat your son in the middle of the street until his flesh was torn, then threw him into the magistrate's office for another 30 strikes. He is covered in wounds and was forced to take a step and kowtow all the way to the goddess temple and back." While she was paralyzed with horror and grief, unable to utter a word, I continued to stab at her heart. "Exactly as you think. His reputation is completely ruined, and he can never enter officialdom. I want to make him live a life worse than death for the sake of my daughter. I will linger and torture him until the end." She couldn't take it and shook her head repeatedly. I laughed. "It was Richard who offered this to me as atonement. He said I am only in my 30s and with a little effort, I might still be able to have another child. By trading your lives for my daughter's, he will treat me very, very well." If I had only relied on the fact that Richard pushed her to her death, she might not have fully believed me. But I also knew Leonard's true identity. Furthermore, right under Richard's nose, I had destroyed his son's body and future. To say Richard knew nothing would be a lie. If he truly loved his son, how could he stand by and watch me destroy him? Perhaps, as I said, he had sold them out. That's why he provided so much gold and jewelry. It turned out they were the evidence used to push them to their deaths. Cynthia cried and laughed, a picture of desolate despair. He truly is heartless. For the sake of fine clothes, good food, and a lifetime of wealth, he could even abandon his own flesh and blood. She continued. That's right. He was always a man who craved power and wealth. That's why when he heard your father had performed great deeds at the border, he intentionally collapsed in front of your courtyard. He used his handsome face and extraordinary words to steal your heart. Back then, he and I had been running for many days. When we were at our wits' end and about to die together, he didn't want to die. He coaxed me, saying that as long as he could steal the wealth and future of the Le family, he would definitely give me an honorable status. He did well. Even my child was swapped into the manor to enjoy wealth and honor. I waited and waited, only to end up with such a result. She curled her lips into a cold smile, tears falling one by one onto her blood-stained collar. I lost, but you didn't win either. He lied to you. Your child was swapped to me, and then he strangled her in her swaddling clothes. I didn't kill her. He strangled her. He lied to you. He killed your child. He lied to you. So that was the truth. I clenched my cold fingers, suppressed the pain, and forced a smile. Don't try to lie to me. My husband would never deceive me. He even gave the two of you to me, which proves he truly wants to live a peaceful life with me. I will kill your son first, then live a long and happy life with my husband. When I returned to the manor, I saw Victoria pushing Leonard out into the courtyard to soak in the sun. She lowered her eyes, playing the role of a perfect, virtuous wife. Not only did she personally change his bandages, but she also coaxed him to take his medicine spoonful by spoonful. Only I knew that she had learned all my methods. In the wound ointment, she added chili powder. In the medicinal broth, she mixed a drug that would make him sterile. In the previous life, Leonard was incited by Willow to slap Victoria, causing her to lose her child and her ability to be a mother. In this life, she gave him a taste of his own medicine, making him lose his lineage forever. Watching Leonard's wounds never heal and seeing him go mad with pain every day brought me immense pleasure. But I didn't forget the wager between Victoria and me. While she tormented Leonard, I didn't forget to keep up the pace with Richard. Richard's body was covered in sores, and the ointment I applied made his flesh rot even faster. Before long, his room reeked of a foul stench, especially his lower body, which had been burned to a crisp. It was now rotting away. Every time he asked about his condition, I didn't hesitate to stab him in the heart. You're at this age, why do you still care about that thing between your legs? If it rots, it rots. Keeping your life is a great blessing. Besides, it doesn't affect your ability to use the restroom. Don't worry about whether you have it or not. Richard's dignity as a man was shattered into pieces. He even heard Maisie and Tessa chatting outside the door. The master is no longer useful. Does that mean the madam has to live like a widow? A marriage without that of life is just a stagnant pool of water. Sooner or later, the madam will get bored of him. That's right, she is only in her 30s, the prime of her life. How can she stand it? In my opinion, since the master has lost his ability, he shouldn't occupy the position without performing his duties. He should be generous and let the madam keep a few young men for entertainment. It would show his broad-mindedness and make the madam grateful to him for life. But the master is a man who married into the family. He might not be generous enough to open the backyard for the madam. Just wait and see, in a few years, the madam will definitely grow disgusted with that crippled body of his. Richard was both hateful and pained. He cautiously tested me, asking if I was willing to keep a few young lords. I blushed slightly. How did my husband know that my uncles have already gifted me several young lords? Richard was thunderstruck and asked them in disbelief. They know I am no longer capable. I stabbed him straight in the heart. I answered calmly, the medicine that saved you was obtained by Dr. Chu begging at the Prince of the South's estate. Of course, the whole city knows. My uncles were afraid I would waste the rest of my life in unhappiness, so each of them sent me a young lord. Altogether, there are more than 10. But don't worry, they are only for entertainment. You are my primary husband. In the future, just stay in the manor and rest. I will never let them threaten your status. Richard was too shocked to speak while I continued endlessly. They are all pitiful people. Some sold themselves to save their mothers, some were from poor families, and 2 are my fellow townsmen. You know I have a soft heart. Years ago, I saved you without hesitation. Now, how can I stand by and watch them suffer? They are just a few pitiful souls. Be generous and don't overthink it. Once you are better, I will have them pay their respects to you. Richard almost fainted. I had to press hard on his useless lower body to wake him up. He has nothing left in his hands, yet he dares to interfere with my happiness. My uncles will never forgive him. Richard couldn't say a word, but Leonard was already going mad with worry. Leonard's wounds were getting worse. His knees were so painful he couldn't sleep for several nights, and his mind became unstable, causing chaos in the backyard. As soon as he heard he had a bunch of stepfathers, he flew into a rage and stormed into my courtyard. You are a mother, yet at your age, you have no shame and are so despicable. The young Lord Zephyr shrank behind my back in fear and said tremblingly, the young master looks down on my origins. It is only right to kick me out. But whatever fault there is, it is mine. Why take your anger out on your mother? She raised you with such difficulty. How could you forget her kindness and turn her heart cold? Leonard didn't even have a chance to speak before another young lord, Silas, interrupted. Has the young master studied so much that he swallowed it all into a dog's stomach? Silas intentionally rubbed my stomach and acted frightened. Indeed, upbringing is very important. If not taught carefully, one only gives birth to such a stupid and useless creature. Leonard trembled with rage. Mother, are you just going to let such lowly creatures insult me to my face? I turned cold. How insolent. Is this the attitude you show toward your uncles? It is not your turn to speak in this backyard. Even your father has agreed. What right do you have to interfere? If you dare to be disrespectful to your uncles again, do not blame me for using the family rules. Leonard bit his lip but couldn't say a word. He was dragged away by Victoria. She said coldly, you brought this humiliation upon yourself. Who else can you blame? So what if mother keeps a few young lords? She was given permission by father. She didn't have to kneel in front of the gate to force a marriage or use a severance of relationship as a threat. So what are you dissatisfied about? These words were like a fatal blow to Leonard's head, leaving him with no way to resist. He only wished he could faint. But his body was in so much pain that fainting wasn't easy. And I was a woman of my word. As soon as Richard was able to sit up, I forced him into a grand chair to let the young lord serve him tea. However, just as he handed the tea to Richard, Zephyr, accidentally, spilled the entire pot onto him. Richard writhed in pain. Zephyr's face turned pale, and he fell to his knees, looking as if he were about to faint. It is my fault. It is all my fault. Master, please do not be angry. I know you do not like me, and I can take whatever treatment you give me. But this tea was prepared with great care by the madam. You should not let her down. Richard's face turned red with frustration, and he turned to shout at me. Jade, don't tell me you can't see that he is intentionally provoking me. I pretended to be understanding but also helpless and pained. Richard, it was I who brought them into the manor, and it was I who wanted them to serve you. If you are unhappy, take your anger out on me. Why make things difficult for them? I took Zephyr's hand, which wasn't red at all, and blew on it gently. Does it hurt? Zephyr had red lips and white teeth, looking as beautiful as a peach blossom in March. He arched his eyebrows and curled his lips, looking at Richard with a triumphant gaze. It doesn't hurt. With the madam protecting me, even a mountain of knives or a sea of fire wouldn't hurt. I laughed softly and tapped his forehead gently. How naughty. I know you like to paint, so I've brought all the best brushes and ink from the master's study for you. Richard frowned, and I continued, since you hurt Zephyr, shouldn't you compensate him with something? Zephyr and I left hand in hand. Zephyr turned back and intentionally rolled his eyes at Richard, who was nearly having a heart attack from rage. His body had only recovered by 30%, and now he collapsed once again. Men have always enjoyed the jealousy and fighting among women, and they liked standing in the middle of it, enjoying the feeling of being pursued and flattered. I was the same. I enjoyed watching men fight over me, and I liked seeing the young lords find ways to oppress Richard to compete for the position of my husband. After Richard's servant visited Zephyr's courtyard once, Zephyr coughed up blood and fell into a coma, pointing at Richard as the one who poisoned him. When Silas fell into the pond outside Richard's courtyard, he cried and screamed that the master wanted to kill him, while he just happened to be holding the servant's bag of silver. Time after time, each of them worked together to torment him. I would pretend to protect Richard, which only made things more chaotic. The group of young lords used all their strength to torture him. Each time, I would look exhausted and sigh to Richard. By then, his body had only half recovered. You are always like this. Since you are merely a live-in husband and have lost your masculine abilities, you should at least have a broad mind. Even if I want to protect you, I am powerless. You should go to the ancestral hall and spend your days copying scriptures in front of my father's tablet. Richard was terrified. Just because of those lowly people, you are heartless enough to humiliate me like this. I showed my disappointment. If you still haven't admitted your mistake, then I have truly misjudged you. I turned my back on him, leaving him in despair as he was dragged away. Alone in the ancestral hall, his loyal servants had all been replaced. How could he compete with a group of young lords? One day there was sand in his rice, the next the hall was full of snakes, rats, and insects. In the end, he was almost burned alive on the spot. It was truly a misery beyond words. From then on, he withdrew all his sharp edges and his rage, turning into a virtuous husband. He didn't dare to let the young lords lack anything in their daily lives. He was also gentle and obedient toward me, maintaining a refined demeanor and never getting angry. He thought that this would bring him peace. That spring, I suggested the entire manor go out for a spring outing to enjoy the scenery. I left all the arrangements for the trip to Richard. He wanted to keep a low profile and stay out of trouble. He still hoped to rely on his only son to turn the tide, but it was just a daydream. Victoria glanced at me and nodded, signaling that everything was ready. We led a large procession out of the manor. This time, we were going to give that father and son a grand gift. When we stopped to rest at a small tea house on the mountainside, I intentionally led everyone to view the flowers under a peach tree. Richard sat at the tea table with his son in his wheelchair, looking at each other with mutual resentment, not saying a word. Suddenly, a woman serving tea, with her face covered by a veil, saw Leonard's crippled legs and her eyes darkened. Like a madwoman, she pulled a dagger from her sleeve and stabbed Richard repeatedly in the back, each strike filled with a hatred that reached the heavens. Leonard lunged forward in a panic to save his father, but he was struck by a stray blow. The blade slit his throat, and blood gushed out like a fountain. With his last bit of strength, he pulled out his own dagger and stabbed it straight into the woman's chest. All three collapsed onto the ground. Only then did Victoria arrive with the snacks, shouting for help. Amidst the cries of horror, she tore off the woman's veil, revealing a branded face. It was Cynthia. Richard's pupils were shaken. He tremblingly pointed at her, blood pouring from his mouth with every breath of pain and doubt until he died. Leonard witnessed his father's sudden death and realized he had killed his own biological mother with his own hands. He was so terrified that his whole body went limp, and he sat on the ground, unable to move. Cynthia looked back at Leonard with love and regret. Finally, with a fatal wound to her heart, she rolled her eyes and died. Victoria lowered her head, a cold smile playing on her lips. The dagger in Leonard's hand was the one she had given him, and Cynthia was the one she had saved from the exiles and personally brought here. In recent days, she had forced herself to endure the disgust of being near Leonard, slowly and secretly setting the trap. Today, she finally got the result she wanted. My son was already in critical condition, so I spared no expense and immediately called for the best royal physician. To my surprise, it was discovered that he had long ago been given a drug to make him sterile. He could never have children in his entire life. Victoria cried until she fainted. This time, Leonard was smart for once and immediately spat out a mouthful of blood, snarling. It must have been that wretched woman Willow who poisoned me. Before, she lied that the child was mine. Then she thought that if she made me sterile, she could take over the Lee Manor. That bitch is so wicked. I wish I could dig up her corpse and grind her bones to dust. The reason was already there, and everyone naturally agreed. Seeing him spit out 3 more mouthfuls of blood, I didn't have the heart to ask the physician if he could be saved. The physician only shook his head and sighed. He is just a breathing corpse. Eating and moving will be difficult for the rest of his life. Living will be no different than just barely hanging on. Leonard's face froze, then he fell into a deep coma. I once swore to the Tang family that I would treat Victoria like my own daughter, and that my grandson could only be born of her. Since my son is ruined and lost his ability before they even consummated the marriage, as a mother-in-law who keeps her word, I must fulfill my promise. I publicly recruited a husband to marry into the manor for Victoria. Being a kind and sensible daughter, she didn't dare to go against her parents' wishes and could only accept. When the Tang family tried to intervene, I simply shrugged. The person I married into my house is my person. I want her to bear children for the Lee family. What is wrong with that? Does the Tang family also want to manage the affairs of the Lee Manor? The Tang family was speechless. They thought that Victoria was only enduring it to protect the family's reputation and avoid affecting her sister's marriages. Therefore, when she returned to her family home, the minister felt even more pity and cared for her even more. At this point, I brought her childhood sweetheart and cousin back to the manor and personally helped them hold a wedding ceremony. My uncles and I stood as witnesses as we sent the 2 of them into the bridal chamber. The lovers who were meant to be together were finally united. As for me, I had long since gained a bad reputation for recruiting husbands and keeping the backyard full of young men. I was scolded by the entire capital countless times. Did they think that at my age, I would care about such gossip? In the previous life, Victoria was the one locked in that courtyard. In this life, the one imprisoned was Leonard. He was like a sick dog locked in the courtyard, not allowed to take a single step outside. He could only listen to Victoria and her husband living a happy life with a house full of children. He could only listen to me living joyfully, with someone pouring wine on my left and someone massaging my shoulders on my right, with laughter echoing throughout the courtyard every single day. This is the sweet fruit that she and I spent a lifetime of plotting and enduring to claim. We deserve to enjoy it to the fullest. The most profound lesson from Jade and Victoria's journey is that unity is the ultimate weapon against oppression. Their initial tragedy stemmed not just from the cruelty of men, but from their own division, fueled by class prejudice and manipulation. They only reclaimed their power when they stopped viewing each other as enemies and recognized the true wolves within their home. This story teaches us that women are strongest when they stand together, rather than competing for the affection of unworthy men. True redemption lies not only in achieving justice, but in having the wisdom to protect one another and rewrite your own destiny. The story ends here for now. If it touched your heart or left you thinking, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and share Raccoon Tale to help more stories come to life. See you in the next tale.